There is a particular kind of silence that exists only at the top of tall buildings at night. It isn't empty. It has mass. It has temperature. My name is Isabella Ruiz. I was 30 floors above Manhattan, standing in the center of my own engagement party, and I could feel that silence pressing against my eardrums. The rooftop smelled like gardenias and expensive cedar. The string lights above us looked like stars someone had pulled down just for me. My fiancé, Marco, was laughing. My mother was adjusted her dusty rose silk dress, looking every bit the proud parent. My father was holding a scotch, his navy blazer perfectly tailored. Everything looked perfect. Everything was a lie. I used to smile every time someone said I had my mother's eyes. She would smile back, and neither of us ever said a word about the fact that I don't. And I saw her before anyone else did. A woman, 60 years old, simple black dress. She didn't belong in this crowd of Manhattan elite. She walked through the guests like a shadow moving through light. She was holding a plain manila envelope. I watched my father's face change. The color didn't just leave his skin, it evaporated. He dropped his glass. The sound of crystal shattering against the stone floor was the last thing I heard before the world went quiet. The woman stopped 3 feet in front of me. She didn't look at the bar. She didn't look at the view. She looked at me. She said my name, but she didn't say Isabella. She said a name I had only ever seen in the back of a hidden file in a London hotel room 3 years ago. She handed me the envelope. My mother reached out to stop me, her hand trembling. My father finally moved, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Isabella, don't! Give that to me!" I didn't give it to him. I opened it. Slowly. Inside was a birth certificate, stamped in Sao Paulo, 1997. It had my face, my birthday, and a mother's name that wasn't sitting in a gold-rimmed chair 10 feet away. My father lunged. His hand shot out to tear the paper. I stepped back. I raised the document just out of his reach, and I looked him directly in the eyes I supposedly inherited, and I said the 6 words that ended my life as I knew it. "It's all right. I brought copies." I tapped a button on my phone. 32 pings echoed across the rooftop at the exact same time. Every guest, every waiter, every family member looked down. The secret wasn't in my hand anymore. It was on every screen on that roof. The truth did not arrive with a scream or a grand confession. It arrived at 3:42 in the morning in a hotel room in Kensington. I was 25 years old. I was a rising star at a global consulting firm, and I was exhausted. I was scrolling through a cloud drive of old family photos, digital scans of physical prints my mother had made for my graduation. I stopped on a photo of myself as an infant. I was 4 months old, wrapped in a yellow blanket, held by a woman I had called mother for my entire life. I don't know why I zoomed in. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe it was the way the pixels blurred at the edges. But I pinched the screen, expanding the image until my tiny, wrinkled wrist filled the entire display. There was a hospital bracelet. I had seen this photo 100 times. But my parents had told me the story 1,000 times. "You were born in Columbus, Ohio, Isabella, a snowy Tuesday in February." But as the image sharpened, the blue ink on that plastic band didn't say Columbus General. It didn't say Ohio. It said Maternidade e Santuario de São Paulo. I felt a physical drop in my stomach, the kind you feel when an elevator cable snaps. I spent the next 6 hours in the dark, my face illuminated by the blue light of my laptop, searching for a hospital that shouldn't exist in my history. By sunrise, I knew 2 things. First, I was not born in Ohio. Second, my parents had spent 25 years making sure I never looked at that photo too closely. I didn't call them. I didn't cry. Instead, I became a ghost inside my own life. For the next 3 years, I lived a double existence. By day, I was the perfect daughter and the high-achieving consultant. By night, I was a hunter. I opened offshore bank accounts to fund private investigators. I learned Portuguese in 30-minute increments on overnight flights to London, Dubai, and Singapore, hidden behind a privacy screen so my colleagues wouldn't see the grammar apps. I tracked down the middleman, a man named Silas who lived in a gated community in Florida. I didn't confront him. I just watched. I watched him play golf and buy expensive cars with the money my parents had paid him to bridge the gap between a grieving mother in Brazil and a desperate couple in Ohio. I found the flight manifests from 1997, and I found the names of the nurses on duty that night in Sao Paulo. Every piece of paper was a brick in a wall I was building between myself and the people I lived with. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house became a test of my acting skills. I would sit across from my father, watching him cut his steak, knowing that he had paid a man to make my biological mother disappear. I would look at my mother's eyes, the eyes everyone said I had, and I would see the fear she was hiding behind her perfect mascara. They thought they had bought a daughter. They didn't realize they had raised a witness. 6 months after that night in London, I landed in Sao Paulo, not as a daughter looking for a home, but as a consultant looking for a kill. I had spent the last half-year transforming myself. I didn't just learn Portuguese. I learned the specific, sharp dialect of the Brazilian business elite. I traded my Ohio softness for a wardrobe of structured blazers and a gaze that didn't blink. I arrived at the headquarters of Ruiz International at 8 a.m. The building was a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to anchor the entire city to the ground. My biological grandfather's name was etched into the marble in the lobby. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face was a mask of stone. I checked my reflection in the elevator glass. I didn't see the girl who grew up in the suburbs of Columbus. I saw a stranger. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, I walked straight into the lion's den. Daniel Ruiz, the CEO and my first cousin, was waiting at the head of a mahogany table that cost more than my first car. He looked at me with the same dark, deep-set eyes I saw in my own mirror every morning. He smiled, a shark-like expression of pure corporate power, and said, "Ms. Ruiz, we've heard you're the best in the business. Let's see if you can handle us." I took my seat. I opened my laptop. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Daniel, you have no idea what I can handle." For the next 8 months, I lived a lie within a lie. Every day, I sat in meetings with the men who shared my blood, analyzing their spreadsheets and fixing their failing supply chains. I became Daniel's right hand. I became the person the family trusted with their deepest financial secrets. There were moments, terrible, quiet moments, where the mask almost slipped. Like the afternoon Daniel took me to the executive dining room and pointed at a portrait on the wall. It was a woman with a hauntingly familiar smile. "My aunt, Luciana," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "She passed away a few years ago. She was the heart of this family. But she spent her life looking for something she lost. It broke her in the end." I held my wine glass so tightly I thought the stem would snap. And I looked at the painting of the mother I never knew, and I felt a scream building in my throat. But I didn't scream. I just nodded. I took a sip of the vintage red and said, "She looks like she was a very determined woman." "She was," Daniel replied. "She never gave up on anything." I looked back at him and thought, neither will I. I met her on a Tuesday. The cafe was tucked into a corner of Jardins, a neighborhood in Sao Paulo where the trees are so old they seem to be holding up the sky. It was raining, a soft, persistent mist that turned the pavement into a mirror. I was wearing glasses I didn't need and a scarf wrapped high around my neck. I looked like any other consultant on a lunch break. But when Rosa walked in, my breath caught in my lungs. She was older than the woman in the photos, of course. Her hair was a silver crown, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of squinting into the sun, looking for something that wasn't there. She sat down across from me. She didn't know I was her niece. She thought I was a representative from a legal firm looking into unresolved historical registries. And I watched her hands as she reached for her espresso. They were shaking, just a little. "My sister," she began, her voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Luciana. She was the light of our house, and then they took the light away." For 2 hours I sat in that cafe and listened to the story of my own birth. Rosa told me about the 72 hours. That was how long Luciana got to hold me before the discreet solution was implemented. 3 days. She told me how Luciana spent the next 24 years walking into police stations, embassy offices, and lawyers' chambers. She told me how my biological mother would stand at the airport for hours, just watching the international flights board, wondering if her daughter was on one of them. "She died 4 years ago," Rosa said, looking through me, out at the rain. "She died believing that her heart was still walking around somewhere outside of her body. She used to say she could feel her daughter's pulse, even across the ocean." I pressed my fingernails into the palms of my hands until I drew blood. I wanted to scream, and I wanted to reach across the table, take her hands and say, "I'm here. I'm the pulse. You can stop looking." But I didn't. I just opened my notebook, wrote down the name of the middleman she mentioned, Silas, and said, "Thank you for your time, Rosa. We will be in touch." Rosa didn't just leave me with a story. She left me with a small wooden box. It smelled of old cedar and the specific sharp scent of Brazilian humidity. I took it back to my hotel room. I didn't open it for 3 hours. I just sat on the edge of the bed and watched the sun set over the Sao Paulo skyline, feeling the weight of it on my lap. When I finally lifted the lid, the first thing I saw was a scrap of paper. It wasn't a formal letter. It was a page torn from a ledger, dated August 14th, 1997. The handwriting was frantic. The blue ink had faded to a ghostly teal at the edges where Luciana's tears had hit the page 28 years ago. There were only 14 words written there. "They took her. I held her for 3 days and they took her. I will find her." I read those words until they burned into my retinas. 14 words. A lifetime of grief compressed into 3 sentences. My American parents told me I was a gift. They told me I was a choice. They never told me I was a theft. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a piece of frayed silk, was a necklace. A thin gold chain with a small circular disc. I held it up to the light. On one side was my birth date. On the other, a single word was engraved in a delicate looping script. Encontrada. Found. Luciana had bought this before she died. She had it made for a girl she hadn't seen in 2 decades, a girl she didn't have a name for, a girl she believed, against all logic, would one day come home. I put the chain around my neck. The gold was cold against my skin, but it felt like a brand. That was the moment Isabella Ruiz died. Isabella was the girl from Ohio who liked pumpkin lattes and summer camp. The woman standing in that hotel room was someone else. I was the daughter of Luciana. I was the secret that was about to be told, and I picked up my phone and dialed my father in New York. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "The engagement party is still on for October, right? Good. I have a surprise I want to share with everyone." The night of the engagement party arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I stood in front of the mirror in my Manhattan apartment and put on the off-white silk blouse Marco had bought for me. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was a costume. I reached into my jewelry box and pulled out the gold disc on the fine chain. Encontrada. Found. I tucked it underneath the silk, let it rest against my skin, a secret fire burning against my chest. When we arrived at the rooftop, the air was thick with the scent of gardenias. My mother floated toward me, a vision in dusty rose, her diamonds catching the string lights. She kissed my cheek, and for the first time in my life, I felt a shudder of revulsion. I smelled her expensive perfume, and I thought of the damp, cedar-scented box in Sao Paulo. My father was at the bar, and his navy blazer sharp, his posture that of a man who had never lost a night's sleep over a lie. He raised his glass to me. I raised mine back. I knew the exact minute Rosa would step off the elevator. I had timed it to the second. I wanted the party to be at its loudest. I wanted the champagne to be flowing. I wanted the fall to be as long as possible. Marco was mid-toast, talking about our bright future and the two families becoming one, when the elevator chimed. The woman in the black dress stepped out. She didn't look lost. She looked like an executioner. My father saw her first. I watched the glass in his hand tilt. I watched the amber liquid spill over his knuckles, unheeded. His eyes went wide, a primal terror flickering behind the blue of his iris. He knew. After 28 years, he recognized the face of the family he had robbed. Rosa walked through the crowd. The guests parted like water. She stopped in front of me and handed me the manila envelope. "Isabella, don't open that." My father's voice cracked across the rooftop. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I didn't blink. I didn't look at him. I opened the seal. My mother's hand flew to her throat. "Isabella, oh, please. We did it for you. We loved you." I pulled out the birth certificate. I pulled out the Brazilian passport. I looked at the man who had called himself my father for 3 decades as he lunged forward to grab the evidence. I stepped back, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. "It's all right," I said. My voice was a scalpel, cold, precise. I brought copies. I didn't just tap the phone. I held the send button like a trigger. 32 pings erupted simultaneously, a digital symphony of truth. The guests looked at their laps. They looked at the PDFs. They looked at the photos of the hospital in Sao Paulo. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a dynasty collapsing. My mother didn't scream. She didn't stand up to defend my father or call Rosa a liar. Instead, she simply sat down in one of the gold-rimmed chairs. Her dusty rose silk dress, the one she had spent 3 weeks picking out for this perfect night, caught the flickering light of the Manhattan skyline. She started to cry. But it wasn't the loud, dramatic sobbing of someone who had been caught. It was a quiet, hollow sound. It was the sound of a woman who had been holding her breath for 28 years and had finally, mercifully, run out of air. She looked at me, her eyes red and swimming, and she didn't see the successful consultant or the bride-to-be. She saw the 4-month-old baby she had held in a hotel room in Sao Paulo while a man named Silas counted a stack of American $100 bills on the bed beside her. "We just wanted a daughter," she whispered. Her voice was so thin it almost disappeared into the wind. "They told us you needed a home. They told us your mother couldn't keep you. We chose to believe them because the alternative was a silence we couldn't live with anymore." I looked at her, and for a second, I felt the old Isabella, the girl from Ohio, wanting to kneel down and comfort her. But then I felt the gold disc against my chest. Encontrada. Found. "You didn't just want a daughter," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You wanted a daughter enough to stop asking questions. You wanted a daughter enough to ignore the Portuguese on my hospital bracelet. You wanted a daughter enough to let a woman in Brazil spend 24 years walking into police stations looking for a ghost." I looked at my father. He was standing by the railing, his face a mask of ruined pride. He looked like he wanted to tear the world apart, but he had no leverage left. "The discreet solution you paid for," I told them, "wasn't a transaction. It was a theft. You bought my life, but you forgot that eventually every debt comes due. Oh, and tonight, I'm the one collecting." The aftermath was not a conversation. It was a demolition. Within 48 hours of the rooftop party, the life my parents had built for me, the life I had lived for 28 years, was being dismantled by the very people who had helped create it. Lawyers from 3 different firms were involved before the sun came up on Monday. My father tried to call me 16 times. I blocked his number after the 3rd. There is a specific kind of desperation in a man who has lost his reputation and his daughter in the same hour. He didn't want to apologize. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to know how much it would cost for me to take down the files, to tell the guests it was all a performance art piece, to make the truth go away. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. And the digital trail I had spent 3 years building was already in the hands of the authorities in Sao Paulo and the federal investigators in New York. The discreet solution wasn't just a family secret anymore. It was a case file. I left Manhattan on a Tuesday night. I didn't take much. I left the engagement ring Marco had given me on the marble kitchen counter. I left the dusty rose silk dress in a heap on the floor. I packed 1 suitcase with the essentials, the wooden box from Rosa, and the gold disc necklace. As the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, I looked out the window at the lights of the American coastline fading into the dark of the Atlantic. For 28 years, I had been Isabella Ruiz, the daughter of an Ohio success story. But as the flight tracker on the screen in front of me began to point towards South America, I felt the weight of that name finally falling away. I wasn't going to Brazil for a business meeting this time. I wasn't going as a consultant. I was going home, not to the home I was given, but to the home that was stolen from me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't dream of investigation files or hospital bracelets. I dreamed of a woman with a haunting smile who had spent her life believing I would find my way back. "I'm coming, Luciana. I'm almost there." The air in Sao Paulo is different from the air in Manhattan. It is heavier, flavored with the scent of damp earth and the exhaust of 20 million lives, and the ghost of 1,000 coffee plantations. When the plane touched down at Guarulhos, I didn't feel like a tourist. I didn't feel like the Ohio girl anymore. I felt like a piece of a puzzle that had been floating in the ocean for 28 years, finally catching on the edge of the shore. I drove past the same glass monolith where I had once sat in boardroom meetings as a stranger. I looked up at the 42nd floor, where Daniel Ruiz had once told me about a woman named Luciana who never stopped looking for her daughter. Back then, I had to hide my tears. I had to grip my pen until my knuckles turned white. Today, I wasn't hiding. And I had the wooden box in my lap and the gold disc around my neck. I wasn't there to consult on their supply chains. I was there to claim the seat that was held for me before I was even born. Daniel was waiting for me in the lobby. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He looked older, tired, but when he saw me walking toward him, his face broke into a smile that was so much like mine it made my heart ache. He didn't say Ms. Ruiz or consultant. He stepped forward, took both of my hands in his, and whispered a name I am still learning to answer to. We spent the afternoon in his office, but we didn't talk about business. We talked about Luciana. He told me how she used to sit in the garden and draw pictures of what she thought I would look like as a woman. He showed me the files she had kept, the hundreds of letters she had written to government agencies that never replied. I realized then that while my American parents were busy building a wall of lies to keep me in, my Brazilian family was busy building a bridge of hope to bring me back. "You're home," Daniel said, handing me a key to the estate. "You're finally home." I looked out at the city I was stolen from, and I realized that the truth doesn't just destroy. It clears the ground so you can finally build something that won't fall down. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and reach for my phone to check the flight manifest from 1997. It's a reflex now, a habit of the hunt that hasn't quite realized the war is over. My name is Isabella Ruiz, or maybe it's Luciana. Most days I am both. I am the girl who grew up in the quiet safety of Ohio, and I am the woman who reclaimed her bloodline in the humidity of Sao Paulo. People ask me if I regret the rooftop. They ask if I could have handled it more quietly. They ask if I feel guilty for the way my American parents' lives collapsed in the wake of the truth. My answer is always the same. The truth does not need to be loud to be heard, but sometimes you have to scream to make the world stop spinning. I didn't destroy a family that night. I simply stopped participating in the fiction that we were one. And I didn't break their hearts. I just stopped letting them use mine as a shield. I am home now. The gold disc on the fine chain, the one that says Encontrada, never leaves my neck. It is a reminder that even when you are stolen, you are never truly lost. But there is one thing I haven't told you yet. In the box Rosa gave me, there was a second envelope, one I didn't open on the rooftop, one that contains the name of the other family Silas sold a child to in the summer of 1997. If you are watching this, and you've always felt like a stranger in your own house, if your birthday is in August, if you have a hospital bracelet that doesn't quite match your story, I'm looking for you. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Tell me your name. I read every single comment, and I will find yours. If you're new here, subscribe. This was only the beginning of the secret. And to everyone who has been here from the start, thank you for staying.